Welcome, children, coming to you right now. Twilighters, can you believe it has been 50 years ago this morning? Now we look at it, okay, in the exact same frame, because every few years, as you know, the calendar will repeat itself. And as we see here, Saturday, September 6th, the 1975 edition of the San Francisco Chronicle that I'm going to be sharing with you now, as it was beautifully shared with me as a gift from the wonderful Deb Silva, who we just love so much and recognize her extreme authority on this case. Wonderful gift because she understands my very strong feelings for Lynette Fromme. And why that is, friends, because that gets asked of me often. You're this really strong, wild, appearing personality, David Rogerson. Why are you fixated on this lady, Lynette Fromme? I will tell you that it is because she refuses to back down. I don't care if she's right. I don't care if she's wrong. Her willful strength, her extreme conviction, and her to the bone felt beliefs are what I'm trying to find in my own life. That level of commitment, that level of sincerity. I've blinked. I've had situations where I've yielded, and this woman has not. We look at the picture here, firstly. Pretty famous one. Hands behind her back. She has a very strong look on her face. She is looking towards her left. She is got an expression that says, so she's clearly has her voice raised, as is evidenced by her throat in this photograph. The caption underneath, she has one Secret Service agent clearly with his hands on her, another out of frame. Says right here, Lynette Fromme, a devoted follower, Charles Manson, was marched away by guards after aiming a pistol at President Ford. 50 years ago this morning, incredible. Lynette still draws breath. Lynette is still very strong. She has wonderful convictions. She's a great lady. She is currently on federal parole, which I don't fully understand. I think is a travesty, and I think it interferes with her ability to continue on with her life as a peaceable United States citizen. I think when you continue to put barriers between people and their freedom of expression, I think you're creating situations that are negative, that don't need to exist, and you create enemies that wouldn't otherwise exist. The woman in red, an earlier threat, as it is stated here by San Francisco Chronicle reporter Keith Power in the edition that is considered the Saturday morning paper, which was the home edition in this case. Only 2 months ago, Lynette Squeaky Fromme, wrapped in a red robe symbolizing the blood of sacrifice and speaking for the imprisoned Charles Manson, made a veiled threat against President Ford. Ms. Fromme, nominal leader of the bizarre followers of the convicted mass murderer, sought out news media to deliver Charlie's message of warning and was anxious it be spread to the public. The tiny red-haired Ms. Fromme went to the offices of the Associated Press in Sacramento on July 3rd, while other media sources were contacted by letter or telephone. The message was explicit in all cases. Manson, who had been corresponding regularly from San Quentin with his Squeaky, was angry with former President Nixon and, by extension, President Ford. If Nixon's really wanting, oh, no, excuse me, if Nixon's reality, wearing a new Ford face, continues to run the country against the law, Ms. Fromey warned, our homes will be bloodier than the Tate LaBianca houses and Miley put together. Of course, Miley, incredible massacre carried out by Stephen Calley, Corporal Calley, oh my goodness, and his band of merry followers. The actress Sharon Tate, a Los Angeles couple, Leno, Rosemary LaBianca, were among 7 victims of ritual murder by Manson's cult followers in 1969. Manson and 4 others were convicted a year later. Ms. Fromey, one of Manson's first worshippers, was not accused of the murders. During the trial, although she subsequently was jailed for conspiring to feed a hamburger laced with LSD to a prospective witness. So this goes on basically to fill out a whole bunch of really salacious, exciting newspaper fodder, such as, we're nuns now, and we wear red robes, Fromey said. We're waiting for our Lord, and there's only one thing to do before he comes off his cross, and that's clean up the earth. Our red robes are an example of new morality. They're red with the sacrifice, the blood of the sacrifice. Despite Ms. Fromey's open statements about President Ford and her record of proximity to violence, the leader of the Manson cult and other followers apparently were left unwatched in their little apartment a few blocks from the Capitol. In fact, Sandra Good, another original member of the Manson family, told a reporter over the telephone shortly after the arrest that Ms. Fromey has just gone up to the post office. She's just up the street. Ms. Fromey and Ms. Good originally moved to Sacramento to be near Folsom Prison, where Manson was in custody. He was moved to San Quentin a year ago, but the girls remained behind, cultivating an organic garden. The landlady, the big Victorian on P Street, where the young women lived on welfare, described them as nice, quiet girls. Despite the more popular conception, the Manson cult is dormant. The Chronicle learned that Miss Fromey and Miss Good were still recruiting followers in Sacramento. They left with young women for sojourns, initiation rites in the remote country. Meanwhile, Miss Good was majoring in English, Sacramento State, in order to someday write the true story of Manson. This refers to some other reports where there were up to 30 followers outside in the rural Sacramento area in California that were, again, undergoing initiation rites and rebuilding the family, according to reporting in the Chronicle previously, but also these things are available on Cielo Drive if you go ahead and look them up with the right keywords. The story of Miss Fromey, as recounted in the best-selling book Helter Skelter, began with her being ordered out of her comfortable family home in Southern California. As she sat crying on a curb in Venice, a man walked up and said, "Your father kicked you out, didn't he?" And that was Charlie. She is fiercely proud of being among the first of the Manson girls to join the hippie family. During the flower child period in the Haight-Ashbury, she was 17, and Manson named her Squeaky because of her voice. Incorrect. It was George Spawn. Miss Fromey's expression of pert innocence impressed family members and even investigators into the grotesque sex and drug orgies and ritual killings of the family's Hollywood period. We knock a lot of that down here on the show, so that's typical of the type of writing we would experience here 50 years previously in the San Francisco Chronicle. Her beatific regard for Manson was never tainted by the ugly testimony of the trial. Charlie's in love with love, she told the court, and I'm in love with love. So I'm in love with Charlie. All of us are. Well, listen to that statement. Okay? Remove the evil Lynette Fromme and the bloodthirsty, murderous cult that was Charles Manson and his robot whore female army legion known as the family. Shall we? 50 years later, can we be a little bit more real and say, we have a 26-year-old woman who truly, truly, truly believed in her friends, who truly believed that there was a really grim future facing them immediately in the form of an apocalypse that was being pushed around from various cultural groups at the same time, intensified, and in fact, really reinforced by several murders and different things, some of which these people's friends participated. But again, that is a separate issue because what your friends do and what people you know do isn't what you do. So to be painted with that same bloody brush is really morally offensive. And if you do things like that in a way to absolve yourself of any of your moral wrongdoings, it's an ugly picture you do paint with the victim's blood in the name of the perpetrators, oddly. That's a thing we see a lot of in this case. Ms. Fromme, as they refer to her. Her wholesome smile was undiminished when the Chronicle interviewed her in the county jail in Stockton, where she awaited trial for murder in November of '72. She was accused by authorities of being part of a wandering clan of Manson women, ex-convicts, who killed a couple to cover up a series of robberies in Los Angeles. Well, as we know, she was absolved of any involvement in those crimes as they were the work of someone known as Red Eye, who was married to Nancy Pittman for a number of years, fathered children with her, and painted a pretty ugly picture of murder himself that had nothing to do with Lynn. But again, Lynn is someone who is on the fringes of murder within the media and within her own personal life. It's got to have a huge impact personally. You see your friends do these radical and intense acts, but you still try to be a loyal friend. Though as a human being, you must have some sympathy for the victims. That's a lot for someone to potentially weigh. I don't know. My name isn't Lynette Fromme, though I've studied her extensively. That fascinates me. A question right there. How does one weigh that? How do you walk through these events? How do you walk through these moral implications? And apparently the way she does it is with her head held high, and she's made a logic and a peace with this that agrees with her. Manson was then on death row when these robberies and murders allegedly occurred in the early 70s, culminating in that trial in '72. So there he was on death row. His sentence has since been commuted. Well, we know later in 1972 that they reversed the death penalty in California, giving any of the defendants in the so-called Manson trials life sentences rather than death sentences, as they had all been sentenced to. So, that being said, some of these people put on crazy defenses to get out of a death penalty that if their lawyers had looked a few years ahead, would have seen the writing on the wall and known that was going to get reversed. But while this was happening for Manson being on death row, Miss Frommie was confident he would survive, somehow escape before the apocalyptic race war he predicted. Did she? Did she say that? I'd like to know where. And let's see if we can research some of that. Anybody out there have quick access to some of those press articles that would predate 1975 clearly? So she's talking about 1972. So we're going to need a 1972 press article when Manson was on death row. So pre-reversal, that allegedly she said Ms. Frommie was confident that Charles Manson would survive and somehow escape before his death sentence was carried out. And there would be an apocalyptic race war, which he had predicted. So in this article, where she has no chance to defend herself because she's accused of one of the most serious crimes one can commit in this country, which is physically threatening the President of the United States with a loaded firearm, definitely producing one. Her motives, her actual desires that day remain unclear. I've spoken with her personally and let her know very recently that I find her explanations unsatisfactory personally, which she was surprised by. But if you read these incredible statements that were made by the press the day after she was taken into custody, the day after 50 years ago today that she, at 26 years old, pointed a firearm loaded. So is she 26 or 25? Let's look at that anyhow. Because she's about to be. Oh, I think she was 26. She did the most serious thing someone could do in this country. So of course she was not going to be able to casually defend herself against an article like this, especially when there's tens of thousands of copies that are in circulation immediately. So who's going to read some sort of rebuttal that isn't going to happen immediately from this woman who's ostensibly one of the most evil people in existence? She's up there with Idi Amin at this point. So she fans the flame of this narrative, allegedly, with statements such as these attributed to her. We foresee a lot of violence in the street. We want to survive. So this says these were made shortly before these actual physical threats against the president were carried out. So this is a very damning series of statements made in print that appear to be very authoritative, leading the public, i.e. a potential jury pool, or anyone in their right social mind of the day to follow the narrative being ultimately, in the Stockton case, the two were accused Manson girls sent to jail as accessories to murder. The murder charge against Ms. Frommie was dropped. Why? Because it was non-existent. As were another charge of robbery pending in Los Angeles. Let's look at her character. Let's look at anything Lynette Frommie has ever done that we're aware of. Show me a robbery. I had been speaking with her recently about how in the press, the 71 Hawthorne shootout had resulted in people's speculation that there was going to be an armed revolution, an armed removal of Charlie from jail, resulting not only in these armed conflicts, very Patty Hearst-like in their appearance, which shows you these were happening across the board. There were women, there were all kinds of things. Kidnapped heiresses producing submachine guns during robberies. Wow. So in this culture of that time, which I'm reading from now and we'll finish and let y'all go about your day, this 50th anniversary of these occurrences, Lynn was surprised. She was surprised to hear that a lot of people in the press had projected not only some sort of killings, but also hijackings and all types of leverage to make sure Charlie and these imprisoned family members were released. And the question being, to what end? Yet, on this day, I'm going to quote, I hope I don't get any trouble doing this. It's the 50th anniversary, so I'm just going to say something that really, it shook me. And again, I hope I'm not making a mistake opening this statement up and saying this thing, so I'm going to take my shirt off. I'm going to be the open book I usually am known as, so that I can just say one of the heaviest things that was ever said to me. I asked Lynn how she kept her character and why I admired her so much was because she did keep her character in prison. She never knuckled under. She never withdrew her love and support for the people she loved and supported. I said, when they took your freedom away, when they took everything away from you, you never wavered, and that's where I admire you above all, because I would hope to be that much of a man. And I don't know that I've always been that much of a man in my life, because I haven't. She has been a much bigger man than I ever have. That's why I admire her so on this show. She said to me, and it shook me to my core. She said, David, they didn't take my freedom. I walked into that prison. I don't speak for others on this show, and it's been a painful lesson, and I've been called a liar because I made myself a liar for overextending my mouth and telling stories instead of just sticking to what had happened, or just not even saying anything, rather than giving into my discomfort of a silence in a room. So I just would prattle on sometimes and say things. And that's been a huge lesson to me. So I take my shirt off. That's why I try to expose myself, because the truth and the character of Lynn that's exposed itself to me through all of my study of her and by being exposed to her great nature, I want anyone watching this to understand they need to have love and respect for her. The fact that this needs to be a low-key video, because on the 50th anniversary of a statement, I don't think this was an act of violence. I think this was an act of contrition. I think this was an act of extreme devotion, where this young woman needed to show, her extreme dedication and solidarity to the ones she loved. And that, friends, is why I'm here on the exact 50th anniversary of what you should please read about today, which was what is known as the attempted assassination of President of the United States, Gerald Ford, in 1975. Read about it and understand the fact that this woman made this statement and was willing to walk herself into prison, potentially forever, potentially for what could have been previously a death sentence, is what I want you all to meditate on today. And if we can consider the semantics of those statements of forever putting yourself in handcuffs to have solidarity and make a statement and to have a plea of understanding for those you love who are going to be incarcerated forever. I would never do that. Clearly. I don't have those kind of balls, man. And Lynn did. Make of what you will her actions 50 years ago today. I feel we can explore it a little bit more. I hope when things lighten up for her and the law does crawl out of her ass and allow her to be the wonderful person she is, who is absolutely a gift to our culture, not a threat, we will have some more meaningful answers. Love you all. As always, Twilighters, I want to thank you so much for joining me in looking for answers in this beautiful situation.